They served everyone dessert but me. I just smiled and waited for the lawyer. The apple pie sat golden and perfect in the center of the mahogany dining table, steam still rising from the latticed crust, like incense in a cathedral. One by one, my stepmother Patricia cut generous slices for each person seated around the table. My half-brother Richard got the first piece. Naturally, the corner slice with extra crust, just the way he'd always preferred. My half-sister Victoria received the second, delicately placed on grandmother's bone china with a dollop of fresh whipped cream. Patricia's own children from her first marriage, twins Marcus and Melody, 22 years old and still living at home, were served next then. Patricia's sister Helen, who had flown in from Phoenix specifically for this dinner. Even Helen's teenage daughter got a slice, though she'd spent the entire meal texting under the table. But when Patricia's eyes met mine across the table, she simply smiled that practiced smile of hers and moved on to serving coffee, as if I had somehow become invisible. I sat there, 36 years old, watching this deliberate choreography of exclusion with the same detached fascination. I might have felt observing a nature documentary about predatory behavior. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were gathered here to commemorate the first anniversary of my father's death, and his widow was making it crystal clear that I remained unwelcome at what had once been my family table. "Emma, dear," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I do hope you're not too disappointed about the pie. I'm afraid I miscounted when I was baking this morning. There simply wasn't enough for everyone." The lie hung in the air like smoke. I could see the second pie cooling on the kitchen counter through the doorway. Patricia had made two, just as she always did for large gatherings. But acknowledging that would mean acknowledging the deliberate slight, and I had learned long ago that Patricia preferred her cruelties to remain unspoken, deniable. "Not at all," I replied, my voice steady and pleasant. "I'm not particularly hungry anyway." Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. At 38, he was 2 years older than me, but he'd always possessed the emotional maturity of someone half his age. "Mom, maybe Emma could have. It's fine." "Richard," I said quickly, not wanting to watch him fumble through an attempt at fairness that would only make Patricia more vindictive later. Really, Victoria, 34, and perpetually concerned with maintaining family harmony at any cost, jumped in with forced brightness. "The pie is delicious, Mom. You've really outdone yourself. Thank you, sweetheart. It was your father's favorite recipe, you know. I found it in his mother's cookbook." Patricia's eyes found mine again, and I caught the subtle emphasis on "your father." A reminder that while Richard and Victoria could claim him as their biological parent, my relationship to him was more complicated. My father, James Morrison, had married my mother when I was 3 years old and adopted me legally when I was 5. He'd been the only father I'd ever known, the man who taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my wedding. But when he died last year at 72, Patricia had made it clear that in her mind, I was not truly his daughter. I was simply the baggage that had come with his first marriage. The dining room felt smaller than it had when I was growing up here, though nothing had actually changed. The same burgundy wallpaper, with its subtle gold pattern, still covered the walls. The same crystal chandelier hung overhead, casting warm light over the same mahogany furniture that had belonged to my father's parents. Even the family photos on the sideboard remained unchanged. Pictures of Richard's college graduation, Victoria's wedding, various grandchildren's birthday parties. What had changed was my place in this room. For 33 years, I had sat at this table as James Morrison's daughter. Now, I sat here as an outsider, tolerated but not welcomed, included but not embraced. "I was thinking," Patricia continued, cutting herself a second slice of pie, "that we should make this an annual tradition. A family dinner every year on the anniversary of James's passing. Just immediate family, of course." The phrase "immediate family" was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut without appearing to draw blood. I understood the message. This would be the last year. I would be invited to commemorate my father's death with the people who had known him best. "That sounds lovely," I said. Because what else could I say? That I had as much right to grieve my father as any of them. That I had loved him just as deeply, perhaps more deeply, because I had chosen to love him rather than simply being born to him. That his death had left a hole in my life that Patricia's petty cruelties only made more painful. Marcus, who had been quietly eating his pie while scrolling through his phone, suddenly looked up. Didn't Grandpa James leave some kind of instructions about tonight? I thought I heard Mom talking to someone about a lawyer coming by. The table went silent. Patricia's fork froze halfway to her mouth, and I saw something flicker across her face: surprise, annoyance, maybe even fear. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus, she said carefully, but I did. I knew exactly what he was talking about because 3 weeks ago, I had received a phone call from Harold Brennan, my father's longtime attorney. He had asked me to be present at Patricia's house tonight at exactly 8 o'clock for the reading of a codicil to my father's will, an edition that had been sealed and was only to be opened 1 year after his death. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was 7:58. Actually, I said quietly, I believe Mr. Brennan should be arriving any moment. Patricia's face went pale. What are you talking about? The codicil to Dad's will, the one he asked Mr. Brennan to read exactly 1 year after his death. In the presence of the immediate family, I used her own phrase deliberately, watching as understanding dawned in her eyes. Richard frowned. What codicil? I thought everything was settled last year. So did I, Victoria said, looking confused. Mom, did you know about this? Before Patricia could answer, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, and everyone at the table froze. That would be Mr. Brennan, I said, standing up from my chair. Shall I get it, Patricia? Or would you prefer to? Patricia's carefully composed mask finally slipped, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. Emma, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I'm not playing any games, I said calmly. I'm simply honoring my father's final wishes. Just as I've been doing for the past year. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. I'll get it, Richard said, pushing back from the table. No, Patricia said sharply, then caught herself and softened her tone. I mean, I should get it. This is my house. But she didn't move. She sat there, gripping her fork like a weapon, staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not just dislike or resentment, but genuine fear. And in that moment, I realized that Patricia knew exactly what was in that codicil. She had known all along, and she had been dreading this moment for an entire year. The doorbell rang a third time, and I smiled, the first genuine smile I had felt all evening. Don't worry, Patricia, I said sweetly. I'm sure whatever Dad wanted to tell us, it's nothing that can't be worked out among family. I walked to the front door myself, leaving Patricia and the others sitting in stunned silence around the dining room table. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors of the hallway where I had run as a child, where I had posed for prom pictures, where I had brought my own children to visit their grandfather countless times over the years. Harold Brennan stood on the front porch, a tall, silver-haired man in his 70s who had been my father's attorney for over 30 years. He carried a leather briefcase and wore the expression of someone about to deliver news that would change everything. Emma, he said, his voice warm but serious. I'm sorry, I'm a few minutes late. Traffic was heavier than expected. It's fine, Mr. Brennan. Everyone's here. Good. Is there somewhere we can all sit comfortably? This may take a while. I led him into the living room, the formal space that Patricia had redecorated shortly after marrying my father. Gone were the comfortable, worn furniture pieces that had made this room feel like home during my childhood. In their place were stiff, expensive pieces that looked beautiful but felt cold, much like Patricia herself. The family filed in from the dining room, their faces reflecting various degrees of confusion, curiosity, and in Patricia's case, barely concealed dread. Richard and Victoria took seats on the sofa, while Patricia positioned herself in my father's old leather chair, a choice that felt both possessive and defensive. The twins and Helen arranged themselves on the remaining chairs, everyone except Patricia looking genuinely puzzled about what was happening. I chose to stand by the fireplace, where family photos still lined the mantelpiece. Pictures of my father with his children and grandchildren, including several of him with my own 2 kids, Sarah, now 16, and Michael, 14. They had adored their grandfather, and his death had hit them hard. They were spending this anniversary weekend with their father, my ex-husband, because I hadn't wanted them to witness what I suspected might be an uncomfortable family gathering. Now, I was grateful for that decision. Mr. Brennan opened his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. "Before I begin," he said, "I want to explain the circumstances surrounding this document. James came to my office in January of last year, approximately 6 months before his death. He was in good health at the time and of completely sound mind. He asked me to prepare a codicil to his will, an addition that would modify certain provisions of his existing estate plan." Patricia's hands were gripping the arms of the leather chair so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "James never mentioned any codicil to me. He specifically requested that the contents remain confidential until tonight." Mr. Brennan replied diplomatically. He was very clear about his wishes regarding the timing of this disclosure. "But why?" Victoria asked. "Why wait a year?" Mr. Brennan looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that might have been sympathy. I believe James wanted to observe how his family would handle his passing, how they would treat each other in his absence. He was concerned about certain dynamics. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I thought about the past year, about the gradual but systematic way Patricia had begun excluding me from family gatherings, how she had stopped calling me with updates about family news, how she had made it clear that while I might technically be James Morrison's daughter, I was not truly part of her family. "Shall I proceed?" Mr. Brennan asked. Patricia nodded stiffly, though she looked like she might be sick. Mr. Brennan broke the seal on the envelope and withdrew several pages of legal documents. He cleared his throat and began to read. "I, James Robert Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby add this codicil to my last will and testament. To be read exactly 1 year after my death, in the presence of my immediate family members, ... double quotes." He paused and looked around the room. The codicil goes on to specify who should be present for this reading. Let me see. Patricia Morrison, my wife. Richard Morrison and Victoria Morrison Chen, my biological children. Emma Morrison Walsh, my adopted daughter. And Harold Brennan, my attorney. I noticed that he had not mentioned Patricia's other children or her sister. This was meant to be a private family matter. "Perhaps," Mr. Brennan said tactfully, "the others might prefer to wait in another room." Patricia's face flushed. "Marcus and Melody are my children. They have a right to be here. I'm afraid the document is quite specific about who should be present," Mr. Brennan said firmly. James was very particular about this. After some awkward shuffling, Helen and her daughter retreated to the kitchen, while Marcus and Melody reluctantly went upstairs. When the room contained only the people my father had specifically requested, Mr. Brennan continued reading. "If you are hearing this," he read in my father's words, "it means I have been gone for exactly 1 year. I hope this time has been a period of healing and coming together for my family. However, I suspect it may have been quite the opposite." Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I have spent the last months of my life observing the dynamics within my family, and I have become increasingly concerned about what will happen to Emma after my death. I have watched Patricia's growing resentment toward my adopted daughter, and I fear that without my presence to protect her, Emma will be systematically excluded from the family that should rightfully be hers." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Patricia's face had gone from pale to red, and she was breathing heavily. "Dad knew," Richard said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "Your father was a very observant man," Mr. Brennan said. "He loved all of his children deeply, but he was particularly protective of Emma because he understood that her position in the family was more vulnerable." "That's not true," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. I always treated Emma fairly. I thought about the past year, about being uninvited from Richard's birthday party because Patricia said it was just for blood family. About not being told when Victoria was in the hospital having her appendix removed. About tonight's deliberate exclusion from dessert, a small cruelty that perfectly encapsulated a year's worth of larger ones. Shall I continue? Mr. Brennan asked. Patricia nodded, though she looked like she was facing a firing squad. I have therefore decided to make the following changes to my estate plan, contingent upon Emma's treatment during the year following my death. If she has been welcomed and included as a full member of this family, then my original will shall stand as written. However, if she has been excluded, marginalized, or made to feel unwelcome, then the following provisions shall take effect immediately. ... Mr. Brennan paused, and I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence. What provisions? Victoria whispered. Mr. Brennan turned the page. First, the house at 1247 Maple Street. This house, which was originally left to Patricia Morrison for her lifetime, shall instead be transferred immediately to Emma Morrison Walsh, with Patricia retaining the right to live here for a period of 6 months while she makes alternative arrangements. Patricia gasped audibly. He can't do that. This is my home. Second, Mr. Brennan continued, the Morrison Family Trust, which contains approximately $1.2 million in assets, shall be redistributed. Instead of being divided equally among Richard, Victoria, and Emma Cattell, and now be divided as follows. Emma Morrison Walsh shall receive 60% with the remaining 40% split equally between Richard and Victoria. Richard and Victoria stared at each other in shock. Third, the Morrison family business, Morrison and Associates Accounting, which was originally left to Richard Morrison, shall instead be transferred to Emma Morrison Walsh, with Richard retaining his current position as senior partner, but with Emma holding controlling interest. But Emma doesn't know anything about accounting, Richard protested. Actually, I said quietly, I have an MBA in business administration and 15 years of experience in financial management. Dad knew that it was true. While Patricia had spent years dismissing my career as just working for a nonprofit, my father had understood that managing the finances for a large charitable organization required exactly the same skills as running a business. He had often consulted with me about financial decisions, much to Patricia's obvious irritation. There's more, Mr. Brennan said. James also left specific instructions about how to determine whether Emma has been treated fairly during this past year. He asked me to document any instances of exclusion or mistreatment that came to my attention. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Over the past 12 months, I've received reports from various family friends and acquaintances about Emma's treatment. Would you like me to read some of these? No, Patricia said quickly. That won't be necessary. But Mr. Brennan was already opening the folder. Let's see. ... Mrs. Henderson from next door reported that Emma was not invited to Richard's birthday party in March. Despite the fact that she had attended every year for the past 15 years, Dr. Williams mentioned that Emma was not notified when Victoria was hospitalized in June. The Johnsons noted that Emma was not included in the family vacation to the lake house in August, a tradition she had been part of since childhood. Each item felt like a small knife, not because I hadn't known about these exclusions, but because seeing them documented made them feel more real, more deliberate. And then there's tonight, Mr. Brennan said, looking directly at Patricia. I arrived a few minutes early and observed through the dining room window. I saw Emma deliberately excluded from dessert while every other person at the table was served. Patricia's face crumpled. It was just pie. It was just a piece of pie. It was never just about the pie, I said softly. It was about making me understand that I don't belong here anymore. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Patricia crying, not the delicate tears of a grieving widow, but the harsh sobs of someone whose carefully constructed world was falling apart. I don't understand, Victoria said, looking between Patricia and me. Why would you do this, Mom? Emma is our sister. She's not your sister, Patricia said through her tears. She's not really part of this family. She's just someone your father felt sorry for." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were true, but because they revealed the depth of Patricia's resentment. For 23 years, she had smiled and played the role of accepting stepmother while harboring this poisonous belief that I was somehow less than her biological children. "That's enough," Richard said, his voice harder than I had ever heard it. "Emma is our sister. She's been our sister since we were children. Dad adopted her legally and loved her completely, and if you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong in this family." I stared at my half-brother in surprise. Richard had always been the peacekeeper, the one who avoided conflict at all costs. I had never heard him speak to Patricia with anything less than complete deference. "Richard's right," Victoria said, her own voice shaking with emotion. "Emma has been nothing but kind to all of us, and you've been— God, Mom, how could you be so cruel?" Patricia looked around the room at the faces of her stepchildren, seeing perhaps for the first time the consequences of her actions. I wanted my own children to have what was rightfully theirs. I didn't want to share James with someone who wasn't really— who wasn't really what I asked, finding my voice again. Who wasn't really his daughter, because I was his daughter, Patricia. For 33 years, I was his daughter in every way that mattered. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat diplomatically. "There is one final provision in the codicil." James anticipated that this revelation might create some tension within the family. He therefore included an alternative arrangement. We all turned to look at him. If Patricia Morrison agrees to undergo family counseling with Emma and makes a genuine effort to repair their relationship, then the original will can be reinstated after a period of 1 year. The house would remain hers, the trust would be divided equally, and the business would go to Richard as originally planned. Patricia looked up with something like hope in her eyes. "Family counseling. With a therapist of Emma's choosing," Mr. Brennan clarified. "For a minimum of 6 months, with regular sessions and measurable progress toward treating Emma as a full and equal member of this family." I thought about the offer. A year of counseling sessions with Patricia, trying to rebuild a relationship that had been poisoned by decades of hidden resentment. Sitting in a therapist's office while Patricia was forced to confront her own prejudices and cruelties, watching her perform acceptance and affection because her financial security depended on it. "And if I refuse the counseling?" Patricia asked. "Then the codicil stands as written. Emma inherits the house and the controlling interest in the business. And you have 6 months to find alternative living arrangements." Patricia looked at me with something between desperation and hatred. "Emma, what do you want to do?" I thought about my father, about the man who had loved me enough to anticipate this moment and protect me even from beyond the grave. I thought about the past year of small cruelties and deliberate exclusions. I thought about my children, who deserved to inherit their grandfather's legacy without the taint of family dysfunction. And I thought about the woman sitting in my father's chair, crying tears that might have been genuine remorse or might simply be fear of losing her comfortable life. "I need some time to think about it," I said finally. After Mr. Brennan left, the house fell into an uncomfortable silence. Patricia had retreated to her bedroom, claiming a headache, while Richard and Victoria remained in the living room with me, all of us trying to process what had just happened. "I can't believe Dad knew," Victoria said for the 3rd time, shaking her head. "I mean, I knew Mom could be difficult sometimes, but I didn't realize it was this bad." "I should have seen it," Richard said, running his hands through his hair. "I should have noticed what was happening and said something." "It wasn't your job to police Patricia's behavior," I said, though I appreciated his guilt. "And she was careful. She never did anything overtly cruel when you two were around." "But the birthday party," Richard protested. "I knew you weren't there, and when I asked Mom about it, she said you were busy with work. I was never invited, and when Victoria was in the hospital, I found out 3 days later when I called to check on her, and she mentioned being home from surgery." Victoria winced. "I kept asking Mom if she'd called you. She kept saying she had." We sat in the gathering darkness, the weight of a year's worth of lies settling over us like dust. Outside, I could hear the sounds of a neighborhood settling into evening dogs, barking, children being called in for baths, the distant hum of traffic, normal sounds of normal families living normal lives. "What are you going to do?" Richard asked finally. "I don't know." Dad obviously thought Patricia could change, or he wouldn't have included the counseling option. "But I'm not sure I believe that." "People can change," Victoria said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "Can they? Or do they just get better at hiding who they really are?" Before either of them could answer, we heard footsteps on the stairs. Patricia appeared in the doorway, her face puffy from crying, but her posture determined. She had changed out of her dinner dress into jeans and a sweater, as if preparing for battle. "I want to talk to Emma," she said, alone. Richard and Victoria exchanged glances. "Maybe we should stay," Victoria said. "It's okay," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was. "We need to have this conversation eventually." After my half-siblings reluctantly left, Patricia and I faced each other across the living room that had once felt like home and now felt like a battlefield. "I suppose you're feeling pretty satisfied right now," Patricia said, settling into my father's chair again. "Actually, I'm feeling sad that it came to this. Sad that Dad felt he had to protect me from his own wife. Sad that we wasted 23 years pretending to be a family when you never really accepted me as part of it." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Do you want to know the truth? The real truth? I think I've heard enough truth for one evening." "No, you haven't, because the truth isn't what you think it is." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected. Not just pain, but shame. "I didn't resent you because you weren't James's biological daughter. I resented you because you were everything I could never be to him." I frowned. "What do you mean? You were his first choice, Emma, not me, you." The words made no sense. "Patricia, you were his wife. You were the woman he chose to spend his life with. I was his second choice, his consolation prize." She laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. "Did you ever wonder why James never talked about your mother? Why there were no pictures of her in this house? No stories about their marriage?" I had wondered about that, actually. My father had always been vague about my mother, saying only that she had died when I was young and that talking about her was too painful. I had assumed it was simply grief, the natural reluctance of a widower to revisit old wounds. "He never stopped loving her," Patricia continued. "In 23 years of marriage, he never stopped loving your mother, and every time he looked at you, he saw her. Every time he smiled at you, or hugged you, or told you he was proud of you, I knew he was thinking about her." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That can't be true. It is true. "Do you want to know how I know?" "Because he told me." 3 weeks before he died, when he was in the hospital and thought he might not make it through the surgery, he told me that marrying me was the biggest mistake of his life. He said he should have stayed single, should have honored your mother's memory instead of trying to replace her. I stared at Patricia, trying to process this information. My father, the man who had seemed so devoted to his second wife, had actually regretted marrying her. He said the only good thing that came out of our marriage was that it gave Richard and Victoria a mother figure, and gave you siblings who would love you after he was gone. Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper now. He said he hoped you would forgive him for bringing me into your life, for making you share him with people who could never love you the way you deserved to be loved. "Stop," I said, because the words were too painful to hear. "Just stop. I can't stop. I've been carrying this for a year, and it's been eating me alive. Do you know what it's like to live with someone for 23 years, to bear his children and run his household and try to be a good wife? Only to discover that you were never anything more than a placeholder, that every day of your marriage was a lie." I thought about my own divorce, about the slow realization that my husband had never really seen me as an individual, but rather as a role-to-be-filled wife, mother, social companion. The pain of that discovery had been devastating, but at least I had only wasted 10 years, not 23. "So you took it out on me?" I said. "You punished me for being the daughter of the woman he really loved." I tried not to. For years, I tried to love you the way James wanted me to. But every time I looked at you, I saw her. I saw the woman who had his heart in a way I never could, and I hated her for that. And I hated you for reminding me of her." Patricia was crying again, but these tears seemed different from the ones she'd shed earlier. These seemed to come from a deeper place, a place of genuine anguish rather than pity. "I know it wasn't fair," she continued. "I know you didn't choose to be born to the woman James loved more than life itself. I know you didn't ask to be a constant reminder of what I could never be to him. But knowing something isn't fair doesn't make it easier to live with." I sat down heavily on the sofa, feeling suddenly exhausted. What was her name? What my mother? What was her name? Patricia hesitated. Sarah Elizabeth Morrison. "You're named after her, Emma Sarah." I had never known that. My middle name was Sarah, but I had always assumed it was just a name my parents had liked. To learn that I carried my mother's name felt like discovering a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing. "How did she die?" "Cancer. She was diagnosed when you were 2, and she fought it for almost a year before. ... Double quotes, Patricia trailed off. "James nursed her through the whole thing. He barely left her side. And when she died, he was devastated. Completely broken. Then why did he marry you? Because Richard and Victoria needed a mother. And he thought you needed a mother too. Because his friends and family kept telling him that it wasn't healthy for a man to raise 3 children alone. Because I was persistent and patient and willing to wait for him to heal." She laughed bitterly. "Except he never healed. He just learned to live with the wound." I thought about my father, about the man I had known and loved for 33 years. Had there been signs of this hidden grief? Moments when his smile seemed forced, when his attention seemed to drift to some distant place I couldn't follow? "There's something else," Patricia said quietly. "Something I found after he died." She stood up and left the room, returning a few minutes later with a small wooden box. She set it on the coffee table between us and opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to my dearest Sarah in my father's careful handwriting. The paper was yellowed with age, and some of the letters looked like they had been read and reread countless times. "He wrote to her," Patricia said. "Every year on her birthday, every year on the anniversary of her death. Every Christmas, every time something important happened with you kids. He wrote her letters telling her about your lives, about how you were growing up, about how much he missed her." I picked up one of the letters with trembling hands. It was dated just 2 months before my father's death. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "Emma graduated from her MBA program today, and I was so proud I thought my heart might burst. She looked so beautiful in her cap and gown, so confident and accomplished. I know you would have been proud too. She has your intelligence, your determination, your kind heart. Sometimes when she smiles, I see you so clearly, it takes my breath away, ... I couldn't read anymore. The letter blurred as tears filled my eyes. "He loved you so much," Patricia said softly. "He loved you because you were his daughter, but also because you were hers. You were the living proof that his love for Sarah had created something beautiful and lasting. Then, why didn't he ever tell me about her? Why didn't he share these letters with me? Because he thought it would be too painful for you, because he wanted you to have your own identity, not just be a shadow of your mother. And because ... double quotes, she hesitated. Because I asked him not to." I looked up at her sharply. "I was jealous," she admitted. "Jealous of a dead woman, which is probably the most pathetic thing you can imagine. But I was afraid that if you knew how much he loved your mother, you'd understand that he could never love me the same way. I was afraid you'd see me for what I really was, a poor substitute for the woman he really wanted." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. I held my father's letter in my hands, feeling the weight of all the words he had never spoken, all the stories he had never shared, all the love he had carried in silence for 33 years. "I'm sorry," Patricia said finally. "I'm sorry for taking my pain out on you. I'm sorry for making you feel unwelcome in your own family. I'm sorry for being too weak and too selfish to love you the way James wanted me to, the way you deserved to be loved. I looked at this woman who had been part of my life for more than 2 decades, who had given me siblings I adored, who had tried in her own broken way to fill a role she was never equipped to handle. "I'm sorry too," I said. "I'm sorry Dad put you in an impossible position. I'm sorry he never learned to love you the way you needed to be loved. I'm sorry we all spent so many years pretending everything was fine when it wasn't." "What happens now?" she asked. I thought about the codicil, about the choice my father had given me. I could take the house and the business and the money, could claim the inheritance that would secure my children's future and give me the financial independence I had never quite achieved. Or I could try to build something real with this woman who had just revealed her deepest shame and pain. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need time to think." "The counseling," Patricia said. "If we did the counseling, do you think we could find a way to be a real family? Not the pretend family we've been, but something honest and genuine." I looked at her, this woman who had just stripped away 23 years of pretense and shown me her raw, wounded heart. She wasn't the evil stepmother I had sometimes imagined her to be. She was just a woman who had loved a man who couldn't love her back, who had tried to build a life on a foundation of someone else's grief. "I think," I said slowly, "that we could try." The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom for the first time in over a year. Patricia had insisted I stay the night rather than drive home, in the emotional state we were both in. And despite everything, it felt right to wake up in this house where my father had raised me. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the room that had remained largely unchanged since my teenage years. The same pale yellow walls, the same white furniture, the same bookshelf filled with novels I had devoured during high school. Patricia had preserved it like a shrine, which seemed ironic given how hard she had worked to make me feel unwelcome everywhere else in the house. I could hear voices downstairs. Richard and Victoria had apparently arrived early, probably wanting to check on both Patricia and me after the emotional revelations of the previous evening. I dressed quickly and made my way to the kitchen, where I found my half-siblings sitting at the breakfast table with coffee and what appeared to be a very serious conversation. "Morning," I said, helping myself to coffee from the pot that was always brewing in this house. "How are you feeling?" Victoria asked, studying my face with the concerned expression she'd worn since childhood whenever family drama erupted. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admitted. "But also, clearer, somehow, like puzzle pieces are finally fitting together." Richard nodded. "We've been talking about what Mom told you last night. About Dad and your mother. She told you." "She told us everything," Victoria said. "About the letters, about Dad's feelings, about why she's been so difficult with you over the years." I sat down at the table, cradling my coffee mug like a lifeline. "And what do you think about all of it?" "I think it explains a lot," Richard said carefully. "I always wondered why Dad seemed so sad sometimes, even when things were going well, and why he was so protective of you, almost like he was trying to make up for something. I think Mom needs help," Victoria added. "Professional help. This isn't just about family counseling. She's been carrying around this pain and resentment for decades, and it's poisoned everything." "Where is she now?" "Upstairs, packing," Richard said. "She's decided to go stay with her sister Helen for a while, to give you space to make your decision about the inheritance." I frowned. "She doesn't have to leave. This is still her home." "Is it though?" Victoria asked gently. "I mean, according to the codicil, it's your house now, unless you decide to do the counseling and give it back to her." The weight of that decision pressed down on me like a physical force. In the space of one evening, I had gone from being the excluded stepdaughter to being the primary beneficiary of my father's estate. I owned this house, controlled the family business, held the financial future of my half-siblings in my hands. It was a responsibility I had never wanted and wasn't sure I was equipped to handle. "I've been thinking about something," I said. "About what Dad really wanted when he wrote that codicil." "What do you mean?" Richard asked. "I don't think he wanted to punish Patricia. I think he wanted to force all of us to confront the truth about our family dynamics. He knew that as long as we kept pretending everything was fine, nothing would ever really change." Victoria nodded slowly. He always hated conflict, but he also hated dishonesty. Remember how he used to say that problems don't go away just because you ignore them? Exactly, so he created a situation where we couldn't ignore the problems anymore, where we had to either deal with them honestly or face the consequences. So what are you going to do? Richard asked. Before I could answer, Patricia appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed for travel with a small suitcase in her hand. She looked older than she had the night before, as if confessing her secrets had aged her a decade. I wanted to say goodbye before I left, she said quietly. You don't have to go, I said. We can figure this out together. I think I do have to go. I need time to think about who I want to be going forward. And you need time to decide what you want to do without me hovering over you, trying to influence your choice. She set her suitcase down and looked around the kitchen that had been her domain for over 2 decades. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll accept it. If you want to keep the house and the business, I understand. You have every right to claim what your father left you. And if I choose the counseling option, then I'll do the work. Real work, not just going through the motions. I'll see a therapist on my own too, to deal with my issues around your mother and my marriage to James. I'll do whatever it takes to become the kind of person who deserves to be part of your family. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or false promises. But what I saw was genuine remorse and something that might have been hope. There's something I want to ask you, I said. Last night, you said Dad told you that marrying you was the biggest mistake of his life. But if that's true, why did he stay married to you for 23 years? Why didn't he divorce you and try to find someone he could really love? Patricia was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. I think, she said finally, because he knew that leaving me would hurt Richard and Victoria, and because he believed that commitment mattered more than happiness. He made a promise when he married me, and he was going to keep it even if it cost him his own peace of mind. That sounds like Dad, Victoria said softly. It also sounds like a man who was punishing himself, I said. Maybe he thought he didn't deserve to be happy after your mother died. Maybe he thought staying in a loveless marriage was some kind of penance. Maybe, Patricia agreed. Or maybe he just didn't know how to start over. Grief does strange things to people. It can make you feel like moving forward is a betrayal of the person you lost. I thought about my own divorce, about how long it had taken me to believe I deserved better than a marriage that made me feel invisible. Sometimes, staying in a bad situation feels safer than risking the unknown. I've made my decision, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Everyone turned to look at me. I'm going to accept the inheritance as it stands in the codicil, the house, the business, the trust fund, all of it. Patricia's face went pale, but she nodded. I understand. But, I continued, I'm not going to keep it all for myself. I turned to Richard. The business should be yours. Dad always intended for you to run it, and you're good at it. I'll transfer my controlling interest to you, but I want to remain a silent partner with a small percentage. Enough to have a voice in major decisions, but not enough to interfere with your day-to-day operations. Richard stared at me. Emma, you don't have to. Yes, I do. It's what Dad would have wanted if he hadn't been worried about Patricia's treatment of me. I turned to Victoria. The trust fund should be split equally among the 3 of us, just like Dad originally planned. I don't need a larger share, and it's not fair to punish you and Richard for Patricia's mistakes. What about the house? Victoria asked. I looked around the kitchen where I had eaten countless meals, done homework at the table, brought my own children to visit their grandfather. This house held 33 years of memories, but it had never really felt like mine. It had always been my father's house, then Patricia's house. I had been a guest here, even when I lived here. The house is more complicated, I said. Patricia, I'm not going to kick you out of your home, but I'm also not going to pretend that the past year didn't happen. Patricia waited, her face carefully neutral. I want to do the counseling, I said. Not because I want to give you back the house, but because I think we both need to heal from the damage that's been done. I want to understand why my father felt he had to protect me from you, and I want you to understand why your treatment of me was so hurtful. And after the counseling, Patricia asked, after the counseling, if we can build a genuine relationship, not a perfect one, but an honest one, then we'll talk about the house. Maybe I'll sell it back to you for a fair market price. Maybe I'll deed it to Richard and Victoria. Maybe I'll keep it and we'll figure out a way to share it. But that decision gets made after we do the work, not before. Patricia nodded slowly. That seems fair. There's one more thing, I said. I want to know about my mother. I want to read Dad's letters to her. I want to see pictures of her, hear stories about their marriage, understand where I came from. That's not negotiable. Of course, Patricia said, you have every right to know about Sarah. We all do, Victoria said. She was part of our family too, even if we never knew her. I'd like that, Richard agreed. I'd like to understand that part of Dad's life. I felt something shift in the room, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. We weren't going to be a perfect family. We never had been, despite years of pretending otherwise. But maybe we could be a real family, one built on truth and acceptance rather than secrets and resentment. So we're really going to do this? Patricia asked. The counseling, the honest conversations, all of it. We're going to try, I said. And if it doesn't work, if we can't find a way to be genuine with each other, then we'll figure out how to be a family that lives separately but civilly. I can live with that, Patricia said. Good, I said, standing up from the table. Because I think Dad would be proud of us for finally having this conversation. Even if it took a year and a legal document to force us into it. As Patricia left for her sister's house and Richard and Victoria headed home to their own families, I found myself alone in the house that was now legally mine. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with new eyes. This wasn't just the house where I had grown up, it was the house where my father had grieved my mother, where he had tried to build a new life while carrying the weight of his first love, where he had raised 3 children while nursing a broken heart. I ended up in his study, a room that Patricia had left largely untouched since his death. His books still lined the shelves, his reading glasses still sat on the desk, his favorite coffee mug still held pencils and pens. On the desk, I found the wooden box Patricia had shown me the night before, filled with letters to my mother. I sat in his chair and opened the box, pulling out letters at random. Some were short notes about everyday events, my first day of school, Richard's Little League games, Victoria's piano recitals. Others were longer, more emotional pieces about his struggles with grief, his guilt over remarrying, his fears about whether he was being a good father to children who needed more than he felt capable of giving. But in every letter, his love for my mother shone through. And in many of them, his love for me was evident too. Not just as his adopted daughter, but as the living connection to the woman who had been the great love of his life. I see so much of you in Emma, he had written in one letter dated on my 30th birthday. She has your compassion, your intelligence, your quiet strength. Sometimes I think you sent her to me as a gift, a way to keep part of you alive in the world. I hope I'm raising her in a way that would make you proud. I sat in that quiet room, surrounded by my father's books and memories, and felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. I finally understood who I was in this family, not the unwanted stepdaughter or the burden that complicated everyone's lives, but the bridge between past and present, the living proof that love doesn't end with death, but continues in new forms. My father had loved my mother completely, and he had loved me as her legacy. Patricia had resented that love because she couldn't compete with it. But maybe now she could learn to find her own place in our complicated family story. It wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations, painful revelations, moments when old resentments surfaced despite our best intentions. But for the first time in a year, I felt hopeful about the possibility of healing. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Sarah. "How did the dinner go, Mom? Was it as awful as you expected?" I smiled and typed back. "It was worse than I expected, and better. I'll tell you all about it when you get home. Love you, Mom." "Love you too, sweetheart." I put the phone away and picked up another letter from my father to my mother. This one dated just a month before his death. I know I don't have much time left, it began, and I want you to know that I'm not afraid to die. I'm ready to see you again, to finally tell you how sorry I am for all the years I spent trying to replace you instead of honoring your memory. I hope Emma will forgive me for the choices I made, and I hope she understands that everything I did was because I loved her so much, loved her as my daughter, but also as yours. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. Tomorrow, I would start the process of learning about my mother, of understanding the woman whose love had shaped my father's entire life. I would begin the difficult work of building a real relationship with Patricia, one based on truth rather than pretense. But tonight, I would sit in my father's chair in the house that was now mine, surrounded by the evidence of a love story that had lasted far beyond death, and I would finally understand that I had never been unwanted or unwelcome. I had always been exactly where I belonged. 6 months later, I sat in Dr. Rebecca Martinez's office with Patricia, marking the end of our court-mandated family counseling sessions. The room had become familiar over the past half year. The comfortable chairs, the soft lighting, the box of tissues that had seen considerable use during our more difficult sessions. "How are you both feeling about concluding our formal sessions?" Dr. Martinez asked, her voice warm but professional. I looked at Patricia, who appeared more relaxed than I had seen her in years. The sharp edges of resentment that had defined her for so long had softened, replaced by something that looked like genuine peace. "Grateful," Patricia said, "and a little scared. These sessions have become a safe space for us to work through things. I'm worried about whether we can maintain this progress without that structure." "That's a normal concern," Dr. Martinez said. "Emma, how do you feel?" "Hopeful," I said, and realized I meant it. 6 months ago, I wasn't sure we could ever have an honest conversation. Now I feel like we're finally getting to know each other as real people instead of the roles we thought we were supposed to play. It had been a difficult 6 months. The early sessions had been filled with tears, accusations, and painful revelations. Patricia had to confront not just her treatment of me, but the deeper issues that had driven that treatment, her feelings of inadequacy as a wife and stepmother, her fear of being replaced or forgotten, her inability to process her own grief over the loss of the marriage she had thought she was building. I had to confront my own issues too, my tendency to withdraw rather than fight for my place in the family. My assumption that love should be effortless rather than something that sometimes required work. My fear of being vulnerable with people who had the power to hurt me, but slowly, painfully, we had begun to build something new. Not the perfect blended family that greeting cards and movies promised, but something more honest and ultimately more durable. "I want to ask you both about the house," Dr. Martinez said. "Emma, you've had 6 months to think about your decision. Have your feelings changed?" I had been dreading this question, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I knew it would disappoint Patricia. "I've decided to keep the house," I said gently, "but not for the reasons you might think." Patricia's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "I understand. It's your inheritance." "It's not about the inheritance," I said. "It's about what the house represents." For 33 years, that house was my father's sanctuary, the place where he kept his memories of my mother and tried to build a life for his children. Now it's my turn to be the keeper of those memories. I turned to face Patricia fully. "But I don't want to keep it as a way to punish you or exclude you. I want to turn it into something that honors both my parents, my mother's memory, and my father's love for all of his children." "What do you mean?" Patricia asked. "I want to turn part of the house into a small library and community center. A place where people can come to read, to attend book clubs, to find quiet space for reflection. I want to call it the Sarah Morrison Memorial Library, and I want you to help me run it." Patricia stared at me in shock. "You want me to help you?" "I've been thinking about what Dad really wanted when he wrote that codicil. He didn't want to punish you. He wanted to create a situation where we would have to work together, where we would have to find a way to honor both the past and the future." Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Tell me more about this idea, Emma. The house is too big for one person, and it holds too many memories to just be a private residence." But it could be something beautiful, a place where people come to find the same comfort in books that I found growing up. Patricia has organizational skills and experience managing social events. I have the literary background and the vision. Together, we could create something meaningful. But I don't know anything about running a library, Patricia protested. You know about managing budgets, coordinating volunteers, planning events. You know about making people feel welcome when you want to. I smiled to take the sting out of the words. And you know this community. You know what people need. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. You would trust me with something that important to you. After everything I've done, I would trust you with something that important to both of us, I corrected. This isn't about forgiveness or redemption. This is about building something new together, something that honors the complicated history of our family while creating space for healing. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. How does this feel to you, Patricia? Terrifying, Patricia said honestly. And wonderful. And like maybe I could finally do something that would make James proud instead of disappointed. Dad was never disappointed in you, I said gently. He was disappointed in himself for not being able to love you the way you deserved. There's a difference. Over the past 6 months, I had come to understand that my father's inability to love Patricia fully wasn't a reflection of her worth, but of his own emotional limitations. He had been a good man, trapped by his own grief, unable to move forward, but too honorable to abandon the family he had created. There's something else, I said. I've been in touch with a genealogist, and I've found some information about my biological father's family. Patricia tensed slightly. Oh, I have 2 half-sisters in California. They're both married with children, and they'd like to meet me. I'm planning to visit them next month. How do you feel about that? Dr. Martinez asked, curious, nervous, excited. I looked at Patricia. I wanted you to know because I don't want you to see this as a rejection of our family. Finding my biological relatives doesn't change the fact that you and Richard and Victoria are my family too. I know that now, Patricia said. 6 months ago, I would have seen it as a threat. Now I understand that families can be complicated and expansive. Love isn't a finite resource that gets used up when you share it. It was a lesson we had both learned the hard way. Speaking of family, I said, Richard and Victoria want to be involved in the library project too. Richard offered to handle the financial planning and tax implications, and Victoria wants to organize children's programming. Really? Patricia's face lit up. They want to be part of it. They want to be part of something that brings us all together, instead of driving us apart. We've all learned that pretending problems don't exist doesn't make them go away. Dr. Martinez smiled. It sounds like you've all done remarkable work over these past 6 months. Emma, you've learned to advocate for yourself and express your needs clearly. Patricia, you've learned to examine your own motivations and take responsibility for your actions. And you've both learned that building a relationship requires ongoing effort from both parties. What happens now? Patricia asked. Now you continue the work, Dr. Martinez said. You'll have setbacks all families do. There will be moments when old patterns resurface, when you fall back into familiar roles. But you have tools now to recognize those moments and address them before they become destructive. After we left Dr. Martinez's office, Patricia and I drove to the house together, something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. The spring afternoon was warm and bright, and the garden that my father had loved was beginning to bloom again after the long winter. I have something for you, Patricia said as we sat in her car in the driveway. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. What is it? Open it and see. Inside was a silver locket, delicate and obviously old. When I opened it, I found 2 tiny photographs, one of my mother, Sarah, and one of my father from their wedding day. They looked impossibly young and happy, gazing at each other with the kind of love that romance novels tried to capture, but rarely achieved. Where did you get this? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. It was your mother's. James gave it to me after she died, along with some of her other jewelry. He said he wanted me to save it for you when you were older, but I put it away and forgot about it. Or maybe I didn't want to remember it. I studied the photographs. Seeing my own features reflected in my mother's face, understanding for the first time where I had gotten my stubborn chin and my tendency to tilt my head when I was thinking. She was beautiful, I said. She was, and she was kind, from what I remember. I only met her a few times before she got sick, but she had this way of making people feel seen and valued. I think that's where you get it from. Thank you for giving this to me. Thank you for giving me a chance to be part of something meaningful. The library project. It feels like a way to honor all of our histories instead of being trapped by them. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, looking at the house that had sheltered so many secrets and was now ready to become something new. Are you ready to go inside and start planning? I asked. I'm ready, Patricia said. As we walked up the front steps together, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. A year ago, I had been the excluded stepdaughter, sitting at a dinner table where I was deliberately served last and least. Tonight, I was walking into my own home with a woman who was becoming, slowly and imperfectly, something like a real family member. We weren't going to be best friends. We weren't going to erase the pain of the past or pretend that everything was perfect now. But we were going to be honest with each other, and we were going to build something together that honored both our losses and our hopes. Inside the house, I found the box of my father's letters to my mother and pulled out the most recent one, written just days before his death. My dearest Sarah, it read, I hope I've done right by our daughter. I hope I've given her the tools she needs to build the life she deserves, even when the people around her don't understand her worth. I hope she knows that she was never a burden or a complication. But the greatest gift you ever gave me, the chance to love you through loving her. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. Then I turned to Patricia, who was standing in the doorway looking uncertain. Come on, I said, let's start planning our library. And for the first time in over a year, the house felt like home again. 3 months later, on a warm Saturday morning in July, we held the grand opening of the Sarah Morrison Memorial Library. The front rooms of the house had been converted into reading spaces, with comfortable chairs and good lighting and shelves lined with donated books. The dining room had become a community meeting space, and my father's old study had been preserved as a quiet retreat for people who needed a place to think or grieve or simply be alone with their thoughts. Richard had handled all the legal and financial details, setting up the library as a non-profit organization with a board of directors that included all 4 of us. Victoria had organized a children's reading program that met every Saturday morning, and she had already recruited a dozen volunteer readers from the community. Patricia had thrown herself into the project with an enthusiasm I had never seen from her before. She had coordinated with local schools and community groups, organized fundraising events, and created a welcoming atmosphere that made people want to return. Watching her interact with visitors, I could see glimpses of the woman my father had fallen in love with all those years ago, someone who was genuinely caring when she wasn't consumed by her own insecurities. The opening day was a success beyond anything we had imagined. Neighbors came to browse the books and toured the house. Children settled into the reading nooks with picture books. Teenagers discovered the young adult section that I had carefully curated. Adults found comfortable chairs where they could escape from their daily stresses. But the moment that meant the most to me came when my own children arrived with their father. Sarah, now 17, and Michael, 15, had been skeptical about the whole project at first. They remembered the tension of family gatherings, the way their grandfather's house had sometimes felt more like a battlefield than a home. Mom, Sarah said, looking around the transformed space, this is beautiful. Grandpa would have loved this. He would have, Michael agreed. It feels like him, you know? Like all the best parts of him. I watched my children explore the library, seeing them discover books I had loved at their age, and I felt a deep sense of completion. This was what my father had really wanted when he wrote that codicil, not to punish or reward anyone, but to create a situation where his family would have to find a way to honor both the past and the future. As the day wound down and the last visitors left, I found myself alone in my father's study with Patricia. We were both exhausted but happy, surrounded by the evidence of what we had accomplished together. "Thank you," Patricia said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For believing that I could be better than I was. Thank you for doing the work to become better. It couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, but it was worth it." She looked around the study, with its preserved books and photographs and the box of letters that now sat openly on the desk. "I think James would be proud of what we've built here." "I think so too." As Patricia left to drive home to the small apartment she had rented across town, I sat in my father's chair one last time before locking up the library for the night. Tomorrow, people would come again to find comfort in books and stories. Children would discover new worlds, adults would find escape from their troubles, and maybe some families would find ways to heal their own complicated relationships. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Richard and Victoria. "Thank you for today. Thank you for helping us build something beautiful." Victoria texted back immediately. "Thank you for showing us that families can change and grow. Love you, sister." Richard's response came a few minutes later. "Dad would be proud of all of us. See you next Saturday for story time." I locked the house and walked to my car. But before driving away, I turned back to look at the building that had sheltered so much pain and was now ready to offer healing to others. In the front window, a small sign read, "Sarah Morrison Memorial Library, a place for stories, reflection, and community." Below that, in smaller letters, was a quote I had chosen from one of my father's letters to my mother. "Love doesn't end with death, but continues in new forms." As I drove home to my own apartment across town, I thought about the family I had been born into and the family I had chosen to create. They weren't the same thing, but they weren't mutually exclusive either. Sometimes, the people who hurt us are also the people who help us grow. Sometimes, the relationships that seem most broken are the ones that teach us the most about forgiveness and resilience. I was Emma Morrison Walsh, daughter of Sarah Elizabeth Morrison and James Robert Morrison, stepdaughter of Patricia Morrison, sister to Richard and Victoria, mother to Sarah and Michael. I was a woman who had learned that belonging isn't something you're born with, but something you create through patience, honesty, and the willingness to keep showing up, even when it's difficult. And for the first time in my life, I understood that I had always belonged exactly where I was, not because I was perfect or because my family was perfect, but because love, real love, makes space for imperfection and growth, and the messy, complicated work of building relationships that last. The library would open again tomorrow, and people would come looking for stories that would help them make sense of their own lives. And I would be there, along with Patricia and Richard and Victoria, ready to help them find exactly what they needed. Because that's what families do. They show up for each other and they help each other find their way home.